Everybody, good afternoon and welcome to today's Mike Ames Show, where we're going to be talking with our lovely guest, Steve Guest, who we'll come to in a moment, about how to build a community of advocates online, because it's so important, especially if you're selling or promoting yourself online. I am, of course, joined by the magnificent Mike, who looks like he fell asleep on a sunbed.
Been to Wales on my holidays, actually, as you all know, because you saw me last week there, really. But the sun shone. This isn't rust. As you know, the sun shone. And I sat in it for a while, but the rest of me is all pale and pasty white look. So, because I look after my body, you know.
It's a temple.
Yeah,
it's a Buddhist temple. Buddhist temple.
I'm all ruined, actually, but there you go.
Yes, perfect. And of course, as I mentioned today, our guest today is Steve Guest. Hi, Steve. How are you doing today?
Hi there. Very well, thank you. Thank you for inviting me on.
Always a pleasure.
It's an absolute pleasure to get you on, actually. The reason we invited you on, actually, is because I read your book, which I can find. There it is, A Personal Brand Story by Steve Guest. Look at you there.
Can you recreate that pose, Steve? Can you recreate? There we go.
See how easy that was then. That took hours in a photo booth to get that one done.
You're clearly a professional. That was done
in the local Tesco's, was that maybe?
Yeah.
Maybe not. I read it, and I really liked it. I've read both your books. And I really liked it. It's different from the first one, and there's way too much to cover in it. But if you were going to describe it and say couple of 3 sentences, which is not about your book, it's about the subject or part of the subject of it, how would you describe it, do you think?
It's the rise of the personal brand. It's my journey, I would say, over the last 2 or 3 years, on the basis that it doesn't come naturally to me, but actually if you take things as they come and you progress and you see it as a journey, the power of the personal brand is unquestionable to where I've got to now.
Yeah, I was impressed with it. But some of those things we do, some of the things we don't, some of them we do not very well, some of the things you do better. But I was really blown away by it. And one of the things I liked about it is the title at the bottom there, is at the bottom of the screen, is how you used it to build a community, an online community of effectively advocates, and the effect that had on your business and your life, really. And I think a lot of people think about creating a community of a lot of engaged people, but either they don't know how to go about doing it, or they kind of skirt around the edges a little bit. But you just went straight in there, didn't you, really, and did it?
I think it's the belief that I'm on a journey, and if I can take lots of people with me and people are on the same path, you get there faster, you get to enjoy it more because you share the journey with other people, and actually the results become more rewarding because I suppose you learn from other people, they learn from you, and the value is a two-way street.
Now, the starting point for that was your book, wasn't it? Your first book.
Yeah, I was a firm believer of social media, I suppose, prior to the book, in terms of my recruitment network and building the business. The book, the initial book, that's the Top Biller book, was written on the basis that I wanted to differentiate, and I wanted to, in effect, have the book as my business card.
Yeah.
I became or was to become the recruiter that had wrote a book, and people would then talk about you and say, "Oh, Steve, he's that construction recruiter that the one that wrote the book." That was the idea.
And that worked for you, didn't it? I mean, you've sold 6,000 copies or something across the world, which doesn't sound like a lot, but believe you me, it is really.
It was huge, and it's my expectation. I was sat in a seminar and I hadn't started writing the book. There was about 80 people in the room, and the talker had said, "Hands up to those in this room that had wrote a book." And there was probably about 9 or 10 hands went up. And then he said, "Keep your hands up if you've sold more than 50 copies." And all the hands went down. Yeah. And I was sat there just starting out thinking,
what's the point of this then? Yeah.
Copies.
Can I say, I know we're going to press on from this because I don't think a lot of people would actually go ahead and write a book. There is a middle ground that we use a lot, writing ebooks, because you went the whole log and got the thing published, and that's like a big deal, isn't it? But you can write an ebook and just get your thoughts together in something which is more than just a few pages. In your book, I think, did you say 35,000 words or something like that?
I was told 35 to 40,000 words can be classed as a
you can write an ebook on a third of that, 8 to 10,000 words, but it's still a business card. It's still a calling card. It still separates you out as someone that's got something to say. We do that. We use it a lot, and it really works. So if you don't fancy the full book, then maybe an ebook is for you.
It's an asset, isn't it?
Yeah.
Ultimately, it's about creating online and offline assets that increase your personal brand. And we were talking off air, weren't we, about Becoming the Key Person of Influence, a great book by Daniel Priestley.
Yeah, but the point is that in his book he talks about basically making a lot of valuable content and put it in lots of places, so it works for you when you're asleep. I mean, that's effectively what he says. And a book, whether it's an ebook or a real book, does that for you. Now, the second thing you said on the journey was you had been on social media for years. You're a recruiter. I mean, yeah, everyone does. But you decided then to take it to a new level, didn't you? You decided to really up the game on social media.
I think the big turning point, certainly from a recruitment perspective, was the start of the pandemic. There was lots of recruiters on furlough, lots of people sat at home not knowing what to do. And I put a LinkedIn post to say, if you're in need of a cuddle, a laugh, a cry, a rant, whatever it might be, I'm going to free up my week next week, Monday to Friday. You can book in for a 30-minute free Zoom call, and we can just have a general chat. And it ended up being 62 calls, and it was global. It was Switzerland, Hong Kong, China, South Africa, New Zealand, Australia, Canada, UK, Ireland, Germany. The list was just immense, and I didn't know any one of them prior to doing the calls.
You didn't know any one of them before you did, because so literally you had this business card, the book, and then on social media you were, creating this brand awareness, letting people know what you did, what you were interested in, and then you literally put out something about offering free Zoom calls and webinars, and people you didn't know were like, "Yes, Steve, that's what I want from you."
Yeah, and I mean, it was an exhausting week, if I'm honest. Having 30 minutes to get to know someone quick enough to understand their problems and hurdles and areas that you could add some value in, and give that within 30 minutes and end the call and then go to the next one straight off was tough.
Can I ask, and during that process, how much do you think timing enabled that to happen? So if you did it now and you do nothing and you did that now, do you think you'd still get 62 calls?
No. People are busy doing the day job now, and I think there was a huge pain point at the time of doing that. There was lots of people that needed to reach out to have a conversation with someone, even if it was just to see a friendly face. It was a time where I think the pain points were far bigger, and the willingness to speak to someone in another country, me being that person, to ask for some advice or some strategic help. I think the pandemic was something that enabled that.
I think it was a universal pain point, wasn't it? Everybody sort of had the same experience. Whereas when you get previously, I mean, they do happen, there are industry mini pandemics, not the real word, but mini things in industries and stuff like that. But it's very industry specific or very job specific. Whereas the pandemic hit everybody pretty much.
I think there was two parts to it. My initial reason for doing it was I wanted to add some value. I'd spent 6 months away from my previous work, where I'd spent 11 years managing a team. So I was probably missing the ability to add value to recruiters and individuals, missing that ability to mentor or help. And I wanted to give back, and it was a good way for me to do that. But also, I think when you just see lots of people in need of support or help, and you can add value, and you've got the time as much as they have, the ability was there. Construction recruitment, which I do day to day, had just stopped in its So it wasn't like I was effectively getting lots of clients and candidates call me every day.
Well, I think that's a crucial point, though, that you made, that you had a desire to give back and mentor. That was a genuine, authentic. It's not like, well, I wonder how I can monetize this. It was, I actually want to help. And I think looking from the viewpoint of my viewers and what they could do, well, okay, free Zoom calls aren't going to work right now. Fine. Right. But you can still use webinars. We still use them now. We've got one coming at the end of this month. 70 people registered. We've not really promoted it yet. So if you pick the right subject and you put it out there using social media, because that's the way in which you can communicate this, then if you do that, it's going to help somebody at that particular point in time. So the fact that people need help doesn't change, does it? It's just the fact that not everybody needs help at once, like they did last year.
I went into them calls, if I'm honest, thinking that recruitment problems, issues and hurdles and everything else was a local or regionalised issue. And then obviously talking to people around the world, all the pain points, all the problems, all the issues were exactly the same. And what I took from those Zoom calls was then to create 3 specific webinars that I did over the course of the next, I think it was probably 8 to 12 weeks. There was one focused on structure and time management, one focused on personal branding and social media marketing. And the other one, what was that on? Can't remember what the other one was. But there was
improvement, was it?
Oh, yeah.
It's been a long year.
It was very specific, and I knew by doing the free webinars and adding that value and content would help the majority of recruiters on an international scale, because they were the core conversations I was having with pretty much everyone during that week.
Can I just ask a question to anyone viewing this? Do you still attend like webinars, or I mean, obviously you're watching this now, obviously, and that's fine. But do you still think, oh, there's a webinar, I'll go to that, or has that ship sailed now for you? As Steve said, you're back into the fray, business everywhere. Let's just bag some of that cash and get it in. I mean, can you just put in the comments just how you feel about that kind of free training? Because the reason I ask is if you put a load of polls on LinkedIn, you can find out what people are interested in, what your audience is interested in. It's not difficult to do that. So you can understand where the pain points are, and you can meet that need in many ways. You could do these kind of things, LinkedIn Live or on YouTube. You can do webinars like we do on Zoom. You can do
mini videos like I do. Yeah,
micro courses like Kirsty does. There's lots of ways you can meet that need. And as you said earlier, Steve, part of this online community is content, isn't it? Is you've got to have stuff to talk about and add value through.
Yeah, it's almost like self-perpetuating. It's content and it's adding value. But the greater the community, the more engaged the people are, the more you find out where the areas are that you can add more value.
Yeah.
And it constantly grows and it evolves, because if you're having an engaged community that ask the right questions, or ask questions or show their vulnerable side or what's not happening, you can potentially find solutions to give that back. So it just continues to create, and it helps your ability to add better content because it's better received.
We've had some comments as well, Mike, from your question. So James has said, for those out there watching who are thinking webinars, aren't as useful anymore, James is saying he still tries to attend whenever he can. Learning never stops.
I think on that, though, just going back to that, of course, all of these, including this now, some people I know are watching this as a recording. Hi there, how you doing? Right? But it's the same with webinars. Same as anything, really. You produce it and you make it available based upon the timing of the people that you want to consume it. So it's great to do these things live because you can ask questions and interact and it feels good. But it's equally as good sometimes to be able to sit down with a cup of tea on a Saturday morning and just check out, what's been said. So I think it's an important thing. That's a very good point, James. Thank you for that.
And then we've got one from Gavin, which I really enjoy, which kind of leads us on to our next point, actually, which is he considers webinars as not only a way to educate himself, but also to online socialize. So he definitely continues to follow webinars, which I think is a great point, and sort of leads on to what you did next after the Zoom calls and webinars, Steve, doesn't it?
Yeah. So in terms of the process, as Gavin has kind of highlighted there, it's been very organic. I never kind of set out with a master plan. I didn't decide that I was going to have a step-by-step process already kind of in front of me. The webinars were successful. The Zoom calls were successful. The amount of messages, emails, phone calls, texts, and everything else that came from that just spiraled. And I was running out of time to be able to answer people. I was constantly being clouted around the back of the head by the wife because I was always on my phone. And I needed to find a place to be able to, I suppose, allow other people to answer questions on my behalf that were equally able to. So I created the free Recruitment Mastery Facebook group. And it was a little bit scary at the start, to be honest, because what I wanted was recruiters to share stories, best practices, kind of support each other. So we were there to be able to potentially support our competitors.
Yeah, which recruiters are known for.
Well, yeah, exactly. It could have been a kind of proper fisticuffs right from the start. And I was very mindful of that and very aware of it. But I think, again, the pandemic and the fact that everybody was at home, people were crying out for a place to go to say, I've just had this crap call. I've just had a client call and had a go at me. I've just had someone drop out of interview. I've just had a fee fall out. Or I've just had an amazing week. I've had my best week ever. I've done this, this, and this. They needed some place to go where they could get the virtual high five and the ability for some sound advice if they needed it.
Yeah,
and I'm a member of that group, Steve, and I have to say it's really good. If you're a recruiter, I would definitely join that if you haven't already. But I think what I liked about two things I like about it. First of all, you are very active, so you're leading the charge, encouraging people to comment or to ask or to give or to interact. Really, I see you do that. What do you have? What is it? Fabulous Tuesday or something, where everyone says something that's
Well, I split it into 3 days because talking to recruiters, there was various things. So we had collaboration Wednesdays, hashtag collaboration Wednesdays. So if you had candidates you couldn't place, clients you couldn't fill jobs with, or roles you registered that weren't your market, you could put in there and then send other recruiters to that. We had hashtag winners Fridays. So it was, you could share how your week's gone and you could celebrate the wins and you could say, I've done this, this, and this, and people could all obviously celebrate with you. And we had hashtag rant Tuesdays.
rant?
So if you've got a problem or you need to get something off your chest, you could just go in there and let off some steam. And it worked really well because it was a place to go that was safe. It was managed. And if you were sat at home recruiting, you knew you could go and share your story with someone.
And that's going to remain important. There's no massive rush back to the offices. People are drifting back, but there's still going to be work from home, I think. So I think the need to have somewhere to go and share and socialize, really, in a weird way, is going to remain there for some time. And the rise of these groups on social media, particularly Facebook, which, by the way, is the best platform for this, is phenomenal. And I don't see it stopping anytime soon, really. And but I like the fact that you did that. The other thing is, I noticed, I don't go as much as I should. I'm not a recruiter, really, I suppose, but I try and add value when I'm there. But I noticed that you get quite a few people who contribute regularly. A question comes out, someone's going to contribute. Yeah. Do you think then, so you've got 1,200 members now, is it, did you say?
That's it, yeah.
Right, so not all of those 1,200 members are active, and so you shouldn't be disappointed if not all of the people that join are active all the time. That's right, isn't it? That's how it works.
Yeah, and people dip in and out. And I know that there will be people in there that sit there and learn and don't contribute, but they take lessons from what other people answer. There's active people that will genuinely ask questions and they're not necessarily worried about asking the wrong question or a daft question, and that's what I really want to push for, because there aren't any daft questions. The daft bit's not asking it in the first place. But there's some really experienced people in that group. There's people that have been recruiting for far longer than I have, and there's recruitment trainers in there. There's people that add some real genuine value, and it's free.
Yeah, I think it's a great thing. Really.
And I just think I want to constantly push for collaboration. Recruitment as an industry is relatively archaic, and quite often we'll find that we're behind other industries in being collaborative and helping each other progress. And I think having a platform like Facebook, having that sort of group, actually kind of gives the recruitment industry a bit of a kick up the backside. He says, look, we can all work together.
It's very interesting you say that, because literally Gavin has said almost exactly the same thing about the group as well. You know, working together and teaching each other is only going to be the benefit. And I think whilst, you know, obviously the group that you have is recruitment based, if anybody is watching, if they aren't recruitment based, a lot of people want that, especially if they're solopreneurs, if they work by themselves, or if they're early on in their career, or if they've just moved industries or something. You always need support. You always need people who understand, because, you know, I grew up around recruitment because obviously Mike had SK, and so I understand recruitment. But I've spoken to people who've never been in recruitment, or have only been a candidate and they have absolutely no idea. And I'm sure that goes across many industries. So if, talking to your partner who has no idea of recruitment is not going to be the same as talking to somebody who's in it, who gets it, who can say this, that, and the other. And I think that works across many industries. So even if you're thinking about starting a Facebook group and you think, oh, it's not a pandemic or I'm not in recruitment, everybody who is in a similar place has similar problems. And that's the power of this group, right? Everyone comes together and supports each other. Is that what you'd say?
That's it. And the group, in essence, it is kind of self-perpetuating. The group is only ever going to be as good as its members. And I can create a group, and if the members don't contribute, there's no group. So it's always about the individuals concerned, and we all have, whether it's motivation, mindset problems, whether it's work problems, whether it's specific scenarios or questions, we all have different viewpoints. And there's no right or wrong answer. And it was important, again, from this group to ensure that if you have multiple answers to a certain question, the person asking the question can see where they best feel the answer is that suits them and act accordingly. It's not about necessarily a right or wrong. It's about sharing stories and experiences and beliefs.
We need to move on now to the fifth and final thing. But before we go, this thing about Facebook, it is a human thing. We all suffer in business from commercial loneliness. If you're a leader, that feeling that you're surrounded by people, but you feel alone. And as Kirsty said, to mix with people who are similar to you can alleviate some of that commercial loneliness and actually make you feel part of something. And that's a very, very alluring and intoxicating experience. And that's why people do it and stick with it. So I think it's an important thing to move with.
Yeah. So before we move on, Barry asked this amazing question, which has Steve thought about starting his own TV show because he can see it now. But in actual fact, you sort of did something similar, but not quite the same, because you launched a podcast, didn't you?
Yeah. So I launched a podcast 29th of March this year. And that, again, is, I suppose it's just part of the journey. It was never part of the plan initially, but it's been born out of surrounding myself with genuinely interesting people, people that I know can add value and great content back to the network. And that's where it comes from. It comes from me being somebody that likes talking to people and genuinely interested in other people's lives and how they've got to where they are. But also it gives back to the communities that I've created, the networks that surround me, where people can take little tidbits of information from people and use it to their advantage.
Okay, so who is your best and probably your most tanned guest on the show? So don't answer that, Steve. I don't want to embarrass you.
Curtly Ambrose.
I think the answer is all there, Mike.
I know. But actually I've been on the show and I listened to a couple of episodes, obviously, to prepare and everything. And again, it's one of the things that comes across, which I think is a key message for everyone watching this. If you're going to do this, it really has to be authentic. You actually need to have a desire to help, add value, facilitate discussions, or get things going to the ultimate benefit of the people who are in your community. I mean, that comes across in the podcast particularly well, Steve, I have to say. And you're a very good interviewer. I'm not just saying that, but you get people to kind of open up and you don't talk over them like I'm doing now. Let me shut up.
I think there's 2 points to the podcast. Anybody that I interview are there because they have something of genuine interest and I feel they've got genuine value that they can offer back. The selfish point to that is I know I can learn from them. I'm not sat here knowing and thinking that I'm at the top of a tree anywhere and I know all the answers, because I certainly don't. I enjoy talking to them because I know I will be a better person having spoken to them. And I am genuinely interested in hearing their question, the answers to the questions. But I also know the bigger picture is the amount of people that listen will gain that value too, and we all become bigger and better.
Yeah.
I think it's good. So sorry, Kirsty, I've just interrupted.
No, I was going to say what I find really interesting about this whole process is I know you've mentioned a couple of times, Steve, that, this wasn't planned. You didn't say, okay, I'm going to start with a book and then within a year's time, I'm going to have a podcast and these programs. What happened is you did something and then you almost used your community as a sort of guide about where the gaps were, and then you took that as advice to fill it, which I think is probably the biggest power of an online community. Is it tells you what your network, what your audience, what your community needs, and then you filled that gap with your next step. So your next step wasn't driven by you, it was driven by your community and your network, which I find hugely interesting, because so many people I think do it backwards. They're like, oh, I want to do a podcast, I'm going to start one in that way. Whereas you were like, okay, people are asking me loads of questions, I'm going to do webinars. People are still asking me loads of questions, I'm going to create a Facebook group where lots of people can do it. Oh, lots of people are asking me questions about this, I'm going to start a podcast group. And I find that is probably the most powerful thing about this community, is it's completely organic.
Yeah, and it's led by the network and the audience, because I suppose if you take it back to its real basic terms, as a recruiter, you look for a pain point and you find a solution. And the whole journey has really kind of progressed along that way. I found the pain point, I've offered a solution, and then things change along that process. And that
Gavin said
the
exact same thing here. He said it's been very organic, it's growth, and you've grown with your audience, which I think is a fantastic thing.
Yeah. And okay, there has been benefits to me along the way, but the majority of what I've done that we've discussed today has all been free stuff.
Yeah.
And it's a cost to me in terms of time, but actually a genuinely enjoyable time. But that's just another thing you add to your day that you've got to do. And it can be the simplest things. It could be writing the show notes to the podcast that goes live every Friday. You have to go and find time to go and do things like that. You have to find time to add and put the content out into the Facebook groups.
But this effort, though, is not just a labour of love, is it? You've benefited financially from doing this in many ways.
Yeah.
You said to me off air that you had more people come to you with requirements, vacancies, and also more candidates because they knew who you were and wanted to be part of it. Plus, you run your coaching and training sort of facilities through it as well. So it actually does provide tangible benefits, doesn't it?
There is a business side to it. Of course there is. And I think from the very early social media days of just making sure I put 2 bits of content out every day, Monday to Friday, is to attract a larger audience of candidates and clients for a recruitment business. I still do that now. Recruitment is still my day-to-day job. And all the other elements along the way have a financial benefit to them. The fact that the training was born out of the Zoom calls as well, the virtual online training. The Facebook group allows you to be able to showcase the podcasts and the additional resources that are open for people to pay for and then go and get their own value. It's a collection of building, as we say, those assets that create a cash flow that enable you to manage and diversify risk.
Interestingly, one of the things I've noticed is that, and I know Kirsty needs to wrap up now, but I'll just say this one last thing before she comes to your tips for the future section. But the simple thing really, it's a small thing that I've noticed. I get more acceptances on LinkedIn, invitations to connect, if I point people to our content page. We have a content page with loads of free stuff on it that people can just have. And I think it comes down to the fact that people see you as a contributor to the market that you're in, not just a feeder from it. Because there's lots of people that feed from markets and that's all they do. They do a job, get paid for it, but that's it really. There are less people that actually contribute selflessly, as you have done, to a market and to be known for that. And as soon as people know you're one of those people, they see you differently. Right, okay, so you're not just going to want from me, you're going to give as well. And that's so important, I think, whether you're building a community or a client base. Makes a difference.
It's the foundation for everything. For example, I offered a one-to-one 15-minute call today to an individual, and it lasted 45 minutes, not 15.
Lord.
It doesn't happen every time, but the process is more about the value than it is about the specific. And if you lose sight of that, then everything crumbles anyway, because you aren't seen as the person that is genuinely looking to add value and help people.
Yeah, that authenticity is always key. And that's something, that we talk about all the time. So, I mean, unfortunately, Steve, I do have to wrap up now, which I don't want to, because I would happily listen to you talk to this about another half an hour. But what the biggest sort of points that I got from this is sort of what we already said. You built a community online because you followed where the need was. You went with your network, with your community, with your audience. And from that, you get a lot of data about what your community needs, which is leads on to other opportunities like your training opportunities. You also get to become known in that space as the person, which you obviously talk about a lot. You're the person in construction, which is why you wrote the book. And that's what this community can do for you. It does take a little bit of time, it does take a bit of effort, but the rewards more than make it relevant to you. So now, as usual, I'm going to come to you and ask for the one thing that somebody should do if they're going to want to build a community of advocates. Now, I am going to allow you to have two, because I know the first one is going to be to buy your book, which I 100% advocate. Mike's just finished with it, so I'm next in line. But we will put a link in the comments to Steve's book as well if you would like to buy it. So that's going to be the first thing that people should do. But let's say people have done that. What's the next thing that they should do?
I think the next thing is to find something that you can answer or offer the solution to. So find that pain point and then take action. Most people talk about all of these things that I'm doing, you can quite happily talk about, but never do. And even if you're worried that the first group, the first podcast, whatever it might be, is going to be rubbish, it might well be, but it's a starting point, and you learn and you add as you go along. So just take action and get it done.
It's what Gary Vee keeps talking about, isn't it? Execute. Execute. Don't just talk about it. Execute. Great way to end.
Yeah. Don't let the fear of perfection get in your way. I think that's fantastic. Perfect. Right. Okay. Thank you very much, Steve. Thank you very much for coming in and talking today with us. It was fantastic. Now, Mike, next week, I believe we've got Mike Pagan on.
We do have Mr. Pagan on next week. He's going to talk about mental wealth, which isn't about mental health. It's an element of it, but it's about building a support team, and he's got a really good angle on it, and it's worked very well for him. And again, it's something that resonated with me because we've done it to a certain extent as well, and it really works. So check us out next week, Mike Pagan.
Perfect. Thank you very much to Mike with your Malibu tan, and thank you to Steve, and thank you to everybody for watching us.
Yes, thank you very much, Steve. If you stay on the line, Steve, for 30 seconds, that'll be fine. See you guys next week.